The Department of Commerce reported this morning that the US trade deficit in goods and services came in at 556 billion, an increase of 61.2 billion over 2016. With us today, we have CPA Research Director Jeff Ferry to explain to us a little bit more about these numbers. Jeff, numbers aren't looking so good. Can you talk to us a little bit more about this?
Yes, Paula. This morning, the Commerce Department reported the trade deficit for the full year of 2017, and it's the worst since 2008. Our trade deficit is 12% worse at $566 billion. That's 2.9% of our GDP. In other words, this trade deficit is dragging down America's gross domestic product by 2.9%. That's a hefty figure.
That's pretty concerning. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What exactly does this mean for our economy? How does this affect us? What are the implications of running a trade deficit this large for this long?
Well, what the trade deficit means is that we import a lot more than export. And the dollars that American consumers and American businesses are spending, a significant portion of them are going for overseas goods instead of going for American goods and services. So it's reducing our national income, it's depriving American companies of revenue and American workers of jobs to a very significant extent. So this trade deficit of $566 billion is our 42nd consecutive year of running a trade deficit. I don't think there's any nation in world history, as far back as statistics go, that has run a trade deficit for 42 consecutive years.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about China. We hit a stunning new record with them, according to this morning's number. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
So our bilateral deficit with China came in at $375 billion. That's a record high for the US-China deficit, and it may be a record high for any two nations in world history. We imported over $500 billion worth of goods last year from China. And what this reflects, of course, is China's export-led policy of taking more and more of the world market for manufactured goods, and the passive policy of the United States in allowing this to happen through a number of policies and in a sense looking the other way. Nominally it's called free trade, but really it's an abdication of our responsibility as a nation to see that our economy grows. And as you know, China is taking an increasing share in many important markets here in the U.S. Technology is probably the first most important market, but there's also steel, chemicals, solar panels is something where we've recently seen sharp growth last year in China's exports into this country. Furniture, toys, apparel, those are all long-standing industries where we've lost much of our market share to Asian countries led by China.
Right, Jeff. So let's talk about the bigger picture here, because ultimately this affects manufacturing jobs. They're moving over to service sector jobs where they're not paying so well. It increases our income inequality. Can you tell us about the bigger picture of what these numbers really mean?
Yeah, this is a fundamental problem for our economy. What we've seen in this era since the year 2000 has been a 27% drop in manufacturing jobs in this country, from 19 million down to 12 million and a fraction. And the significance of that is that those jobs traditionally have been well-paying, with good benefits, stable hours, and so on. Now, what we've seen as those jobs have declined is service sector jobs have risen. Some service sector jobs are good jobs. Working in finance is a very good job, but that's only a small section of service. The majority of service sector jobs tend to be lower paid than manufacturing jobs. They have less hours per week and less stability in their hours. So it's a more precarious existence. That's contributed to a major change in the U.S. economy. Go back 20, 30, 40 years, people had more stable jobs and more stable incomes. Median family income tended to rise from year to year. Since 1999, median family income in this country has been pretty much flat, and we've seen a lot of instability, a lot of problems for families, and a lot of that is due to the loss of these good-paying jobs. We believe they are closely linked to the loss of manufacturing industry and the loss of exports and the loss of the domestic market to imports. In other words, the higher trade rates.
I couldn't agree anymore. So what can we do about it? What can our government do about it? What are some actions that we can take in order to fix this issue?
Well, there's a lot of things the government can do about this. And, as you noticed in last year's presidential election, both parties had candidates saying the government needs to do more about trade. In the event, the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, won the election. He's talked about a number of policies that can be implemented to reduce the trade deficit and number of investigations, but more has to be done. And I'm confident that more will be done in the near future. The things that need to be done include better enforcement of existing trade laws. We've got lots of laws on the books and international rules that provide and that require countries to obey fair trading principles. In other words, massive subsidies by governments are not allowed. Intellectual property theft is not allowed. If we enforce those rules today, that will improve the trade deficit and improve the position of U.S. industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is trade agreements need to be renegotiated. Whether we're talking about the NAFTA agreement with Canada and Mexico, and by the way, our Canada and our Mexico bilateral deficits both got worse in 2017, or our deficit with Korea in the KORUS agreement. All of those agreements can and should be renegotiated, and the Trump administration has begun that process. Those trade agreements did not work well for the United States. They worked well for those foreign countries who had export-led economies and knew how to take advantage of them. In some cases, they worked well for the U.S. multinationals that moved production to those foreign countries. They did not work well for the typical American worker. So those need to be renegotiated. And the Trump administration and Robert Lighthizer are working on that, and we applaud that effort. Finally, the dollar is overvalued. By my estimation, some 18 to 20% overvalued today. We need to do something about that. We've got a proposal for a tax on foreign holdings of U.S. financial assets, which would help bring down the dollar. There are a number of policies we can do to bring down the dollar. Successful countries have fairly valued currencies. Countries that have overvalued currencies feel like they've got a lot of purchasing power, but they are slowly digging out the ground from beneath their feet and setting themselves up for a decline and a collapse. We need to get the dollar to a fair value.
Well, that's about all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us and for informing us a little bit about what these numbers mean.
Thanks very much, Paula. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. And if you have any questions on the trade deficit numbers, make sure to visit our website at prosperousamerica.org. We'll see you next time.